Welcome. You're listening to The Hill by Thieves Theatre. I'm Gabriele.
I'm Nick, and we're thieves.
We're thieves. Well, actually, beginning in 1981, we called ourselves Thieves Theatre. But we didn't just do theater. We did conceptual guerrilla art projects, or what we called paratheatrical theater. Our goal was to disrupt and alter the social and political status quo.
Which really means we just like putting sticks in anthills and watching the ants scurry and readjust to their new reality.
Their new status quo.
New status quo.
Exactly.
Right.
So last episode, we talked about Marat Sade. And in this episode, we're going to cover our move to New York City, our production of Trash, the City, and Death, and how all of it led up to our work on the Hill, right? Mm-hmm. So after I graduated Yale, we moved ourselves from New Haven to New York because back then, it's not so necessary today, but back then actors either moved to LA or New York, depending on whether they wanted to do film and television or theater, right? So we moved to New York and we had to figure out how to make a living in a super expensive, super crime-riddled, dirty city that took a lot of getting used to.
Well, it was so expensive, and you had to have literally a full-time day job to just afford rent.
Yeah. We lived in Chicago before that, and then of course in New Haven with going to school in a protected environment. It was a big culture shock for us.
Yeah, it was actually.
Yeah.
Right.
So Nick continued to do Man with Van, but promptly got stymied when his van was stolen, and we had to go back to Chicago and regroup and buy a new van and go into even further into debt.
Yeah.
And I was tired of tending bar, which I did since I met Nick, and so I took a quickie crash course in word processing, went to a temp agency and said I had 2 years experience, right. and then winged it. So I soon started working for Rothschild, Inc. That's the famous Jewish banking family from Frankfurt, Germany, which is going to become relevant in just a little bit. And I worked there under Wilbur Ross, who I would work for 22 years. He was later Trump's Secretary of Commerce, right. If that name sounds familiar to you. So I worked for him during Trash. I worked for him while we were doing The Hill. I would fill in for secretaries. I was basically doing presentations and word processing, and I worked mostly in the evenings as also kind of a gatekeeper. And I would get a black car home, and I worked at Rockefeller Center, and I would ask that black car to drop me off at the shantytown.
Right. And
without fail, of course, the drivers ask me, "Are you sure you want to get off here? I don't think I can let you get off here." So, any case, that was at Rothschild, Inc. And I also had a high-powered agent, which is what one did after what one got out of Yale as an actor. And I went on auditions, but I found the whole environment, the whole process very sort of unsatisfying. It was all about competition and resume building and showbiz and everything that goes with that, which is essentially the race to fame. And we talked a little bit about celebrity in the US. And that race to fame started at Yale. Places like Yale and Juilliard are kind of star manufacturing machines, right? They have to do that, and they have to keep up their reputations that way. Right. And as students at Yale, we were hanging around and acting with people like Glenn Close and Christopher Walken and Diane Wiest during my time at the Yale Rep. And sure enough, there were plenty of eventual stars that came out of my era. John Turturro, Angela Bassett, Patricia Clarkson, Chris Noth.
Yeah, and I mean, there were a lot of actors who also just started making a living at acting, and I eventually did make a living just acting. I mean, a lot of them worked for Man with Van for a number.
Yeah, when they were getting started, right? But the other person that that I went to school with, that we had a relationship with, was Frances McDormand, right?
Right.
She was a friend, and she was 2 years ahead of me. And when I got out, she asked if we needed a sublet
In New York.
in New York, and we said sure. And she said, "Well, you know, I just made this movie called Blood Simple."
Cohen's first movie.
With these guys called Joel and Ethan Cohen.
Right.
And they're going to hit the road trying to find distributors, going to the Toronto Film Festival, et cetera, and they need subletters for their apartment. And we said, okay, sure.
It was like $580 or something
month,
for a two-bedroom?
Two-bedroom apartment at 100th and Riverside.
Right.
And Nick's dubious claim to fame.
Well, yeah, I almost burned down the building. I was watching television in the back room while trying to fry French fries at the kitchen, and somehow I forgot about it, and it started a grease fire.
Yeah, and it was the apartment was at a ground floor level, so I was walking down 100th, made the right onto Riverside, and saw smoke billowing out of our apartment.
I had it under control.
Yeah,
I had
you
thrown
say you did.
blankets and suitcases on top of it.
In any case, it took us weeks to clean up the soot caused by a grease fire, and we had burned a hole in the linoleum. And I just remember one of the funnier lines that we said, we cleaned everything. We took each and every book off. And
we had told the Coen brothers about the fire, right?
Yeah, and we burned a hole in your linoleum, but we replaced the linoleum. And Joel goes, "You replaced the linoleum?"
Right.
He had to be there, but it was very funny the way he said it. So anyway, I was, temping. We were working really hard on going on all these auditions, and I wasn't really suited for this whole auditioning life. I love to act. I still love to act to this day, right? But this fast track game had kind of taken the joy out of it for me. Plus, I didn't really like hitchhiking through life, right? Waiting for some director to pick me up and, and doing the elephant in the tutu until somebody did. And I wanted more control over my life. And I wanted art, I guess you could say. So we concentrated again on Thieves Theatre. Meaning I concentrated again. Nick's been concentrating on it all along, right?
But we had a move. Tanoush, we had somewhat of a breakup with Marat Sade up in Toronto.
With Tanoush, you mean?
Yeah, and Tanoush stayed in Toronto. He wasn't doing Thieves Theatre anymore. But we were determined to keep Thieves Theatre going, so we were bringing Thieves Theatre to New York.
To New York, yeah.
And with you having graduated from Yale, there were a lot of actors that were there in New York that we wanted to work with on Thieves Theatre.
Right. And also, it's also at that point that we teamed up with another classmate of mine. Actually, he was a year ahead of me as well, but playwright Erect N. And he became co-artistic director with us of Thieves Theatre for a while. And with him, we started a nonprofit, and we developed a new logo that his father then made for us. And
we tried to become a legitimate nonprofit theater,
exactly,
as opposed to just Thieves Theatre.
Winging it, So we did Traveling Light and The Human Voice at Washington Square Church, which we talked about last episode a little bit with Eric. And then in 86, 87, we began Trash, the City, and Death. And I want to say from the outset here that this is a huge story. An entire podcast of many, many episodes could be made out of the controversies surrounding Trash, the City, and Death alone. Scores, if not hundreds, of books and articles and academic papers have been written about the phenomenon that is this Fassbinder play. And we'll put some links on the website, thievestheatre.org, where you can inform yourself about the details of that if you want, or we'll put some links there. As I said, it's really a huge story. But in this episode, we want to encapsulate the controversy, which is honestly a daunting task.
Well, controversy, scandal, it's often called a scandal.
Yes, yeah, interchangeably, controversy, scandal, right? And then to focus specifically on our production. After the Marat Sade in the last episode, it's going to shine yet another light on our kind of MO and how we came to put a tipi in a shantytown. So here's the upshot. Fassbinder wrote the play in 1975. It is set in Frankfurt at the time of the Häuserkampf, which means the housing struggle, in the early 1970s in Frankfurt, during which student protesters occupied properties that had been earmarked for development. There was massive land speculation, driving, half of Frankfurt's West End neighborhood, driving that residential population out and triggering huge public resistance to the excesses of this growth euphoria. High-rises were going up everywhere, and numerous 19th century buildings were being demolished and their long-established tenants driven out by very rough methods. Several hundred houses stood empty in the West End of the 70s and often in completely shabby condition. They started calling Frankfurt Manhattan. Frankfurt is on the river Main, and they also started calling it Frankfurt instead of Frankfurt. Krank means sick in German. So it was heady times in Frankfurt at the time. And one of the prominent names in this complicated story was Ignaz Bubis. And along with being a leading voice in the public campaign against German anti-Semitism, which is partially what makes this so complicated, right? He was also a real estate speculator that had drawn the ire of many on the political left, especially the squatters' rights movement. He was considered by many to have taken advantage of his Jewishness for business and political gain. So you see where this is a complicated story, right? Fassbinder's play is about a poor prostitute, Roma B, who begins to prosper when she finds a wealthy client, a character referred to not by name, but only as, quote unquote, the rich Jew.
Which makes the play probably the thing in the play that makes it so controversial.
Yes, right. And it's all anybody knew about. They knew nothing about the play. Fassbinder often got conflated with his anti-Semitic character in the play, which confounded him. The rich Jew is a real estate speculator for the city government, and Roma's husband and pimp, Franz, becomes discouraged by Roma's success and leaves her for another man. Roma convinces the rich Jew to kill her. He avoids being charged with a crime because of his connections with the city government, and Franz is accused of her death instead.
Right. He wrote this in, an overnight trip back and forth to LA.
Supposedly, right.
Well, he claimed that. But
he claimed that himself, right? Yeah, from LA to Frankfurt. Fassbinder was obviously allegorizing and satirizing Ignaz Bubis in this. So, a major German publisher, Suhrkamp Press, withdrew publication, which was, of course, a literary scandal in and of itself, or controversy. They withdrew all copies of the play and announced that it would not be reprinted until Fassbinder changed the name of the rich Jew. When we got the play, the character was called the rich Jew, but I don't remember how that came about, whether Fassbinder changed it or the estate changed it. The play...
Fassbinder had died,
in 1982.
Yeah, so years before the play was even published.
Right, yeah. The play tried to be staged 7 times in Germany, including by Fassbinder himself, and each time unsuccessfully and to public protest. But on October 31st, 1985, when the play was supposed to open at the prestigious Frankfurt Schauspielhaus, around 30 members of Frankfurt's Jewish community occupied the stage to protest the play. And that was sort of the height of the play's controversy, that particular incident. It turned into an out-and-out scandal for several reasons, right? For one, there were two competing democratic values at stake here in Germany.
In every democracy.
In every
right?
democracy, in the Federal Republic of Germany is what I wanted to say, because back then it was still East and West, right? One of them was the protection of human dignity, and on the other hand, freedom of expression. So those who were opposed to the play argued that the play was anti-Semitic and should therefore be banned. Those who came to its and to Fassbinder's defense argued artistic freedom and the right of the theater-going audience to make up their own minds about an artist as important as Fassbinder was already by that time, a gay man with a history of championing the downtrodden and the marginalized, right?
Fassbinder was known at that time basically for his films.
Yeah.
He had come back to theater after already making a reputation in film.
Exactly. I mean, he was already world famous, so ignoring him seemed not an option. Among many other things, the case study of Trash, the City, and Death also gives insight into the nature of scandals, right? As we know all too well these days, scandals come about when rumors are circulated without the benefit of fact, and especially without the benefit of context. So...
Big lie.
Exactly.
A lot of big lies going on. Right?
Yeah. So that production at the Schauspielhaus in 1985 was eventually performed, but only for a select group of critics and never for the general public, which was therefore, prevented from forming their own opinion. So the scandal and its emotional responses to it was further exacerbated because only mediators were able to speak from an informed position directly to the public at large.
Of course, that's how we found the play.
Yeah.
We found it in journals and in the controversy going on inside various journals that were being published.
Exactly.
Right.
But these mediators, of course, weren't neutral, right? They held very strong opinions themselves as they were telling the general public what the play was all about. So the scandal in Germany is about this crucial question, okay? How will West Germany come to terms with its Nazi past? It had been a mere 40 years since the end of World War II. Some argued that the play marked a turning point in Jewish life in the Federal Republic.
Well, yeah,
the play marked a turning point. You can imagine.
Yeah, because this is the first time the community of Jews stepped up and collectively protested.
Exactly.
Since World War II, right?
Well, ever.
Ever.
But this is a new generation now. It's a second generation of Jews in Germany, and they were taking the stage. They were organizing, right? Just prior to that, it needs to be mentioned too, Reagan had done his visit to the cemetery at Bitburg.
Right, which was a big international, I guess, scandal.
Huge international scandal.
Right.
Because there were not just German soldiers buried at Bitburg, there were SS officers and Nazis buried there.
Yeah, so him shaking hands with, who was the Chancellor, Kohl?
Kohl, yeah.
At the,
At the ceremony, you know, Reagan was trying to bridge something. Everybody was trying to...
And that happened in 85.
Yeah. In any case, it was one of the many steps taken by Germany in reckoning with its past. And we would argue that that's exactly what Fassbinder was doing, fearlessly confronting the elephant in the room head on, which didn't make him anti-Semitic. On the contrary, that was our stance. And by the way, I would also argue, and this is from a very personal position as a German, right, that in general, Germany has done quite well over the decades by this point in coming to terms with its shameful past. It has confronted it head on for some time now, whereas in the US, that's only beginning. You know, the US is only beginning to come to terms with its sins like slavery or the Native American genocide that was symbolically completed with the massacre at Wounded Knee, for example, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So that's the overview of the nature of the controversy in Germany. But we weren't in Germany. We were in the United States, specifically in New York City, where over 1 million Jews lived, more than in any other city in the world, including cities in Israel. So there was a whole different dynamic at play here in New York than there was in Frankfurt, Germany, 40 years after the war.
And after Fassbinder had been stopped from, he tried to do the play himself.
Yes.
And after that, he said that the play it was going to be done only in Frankfurt or in New York.
Yes, it had to premiere in either Frankfurt or New York.
And what he knew about New York, I don't know, but I mean, we knew the parallels between what he was talking about in the 70s in Frankfurt to the time we were there in the mid-80s in New York.
Exactly. So I'm going to get to that now, right? So at that point, as you know, we'd primarily worked at ABC No Rio, and we were going back there now. ABC No Rio was still and is still on Rivington, on the Lower East Side of New York, where in the mid-80s, rampant real estate speculation was a hot topic. Actually, it still is, but back then, Fassbinder, again, stipulated that his play needed to premiere in Frankfurt or New York. And there was a reason for that, which is what Nick was driving at, you know?
So ABC No Rio was site-specific and zeitgeist-specific to what was going on inside New York.
Yes.
It was the center of where things were going. Artists were being kicked out of, the gentrification was happening where people, the East Village Operation Pressure Point.
I'll get to that in a second, you know, but I want to remind you too how ABC No Rio came about, right? They did the real estate show, squatted in a building on Delancey Street, and then were given, the city gave them the building on Rivington Street where they are now. You know, the Lower East Side has always been a Jewish enclave. First, it was part of Little Germany. Then it became, the Orchard Street, which is a famous street with Jewish stores and markets, was just nearby. There was a matzah factory right next to ABC No Rio.
But at that time, in the mid-'80s, most of the Jews had moved out of the Lower East Side.
Well, yes.
Except for some of the shops, like the Massabal shop and other on Orchard Street. But they had moved out, and it was now mostly Dominican and Puerto Rican families that lived there.
Right. And at this point, the city owned most of the real estate in the area. But you know what? Chic Greenwich Village was nearby. To the west of it, Wall Street was just to the south of it. And it was being gentrified at a fantastic rate. Building owners were getting tax abatements, compulsory evacuations were taking place, dwellings were being torn down. It became the hottest area for real estate speculation in New York. Yuppies go away was the cry, right?
Yuppies go home.
Yuppies go home.
Whatever. Get rid of the yuppie. Yeah. I mean, everyone saw that when Operation Pressure Point came in.
Right. Okay, so...
Go ahead. You can tell what I mean.
Right. Well, I want to say first, in leading up to that, what the story of that was, right? It was a hotbed of drug activity in the 80s, the Lower East Side. It was so bad that in 84, New York City law enforcement said, we've got to do something radical, which is what this Operation Pressure Point is that you're talking about, right? On the U.S. Justice Department website, it says that year, 84, law enforcement made over 11,000 arrests, issued over 45,000 summonses in the neighborhood, trying to stem the drug trade, and as of June 88, personnel had made over 36,000 arrests, an average of 25 arrests a day. So, it was in the middle of this environment, this sort of site-specific, zeitgeist-specific environment, that we decided to write the Fassbinder estate.
And asked him if we could do the play.
Right.
I mean, we were already rehearsing it, by the way, and we had tried to contact not the estate through the representative in New York, Elizabeth Martin.
Yes. But, the reason I just want to say, too, that we wanted to put this particular stick in this particular anthill, because anytime something is banned or shunned or marginalized, we feel it's important to shine a light on it and to examine it and to figure out what's behind it all, right? And we felt a kinship with Fassbinder. He died at the age of 37 in 1982 after he had directed Corel, the movie that was based on Jean Genet's 1947 novel, starring Brad Davis, who was diagnosed with HIV in 85 and later died, plus like Marat, Sade. We wanted theater to have broader ramifications. We wanted to be in dialogue with real life and the real world with our theater work, and to have an impact beyond the walls of the theater space. Theater passe-muraille, as the theater in Toronto was called, theater beyond walls, So we were coming out of Marat with that already in mind, right?
Didn't we invent Ben Trovato at that point too?
Talk about Ben Trovato.
Yeah,
it was so brilliant. Nick invented Ben Trovato.
Well, I mean, Ben Trovato. I guess you have to go to the dictionary and see who Ben Trovato is. You could go to the dictionary and find out who he is. But anyway,
it's not a he.
It's a she?
No, it's an it. It's a concept.
Well, what?
Do we want to say it, or do we want to make people look it up?
You got to look up Ben Trovato. I said you got to in the dictionary.
Okay, look up Ben Trovato. He's famous.
He's in the dictionary. Okay, enough.
And he became our publicist.
Right. And Trash had this celebrity or this scandal attached to it.
Yeah.
So we wanted to stay somewhat anonymous. We did audition actors for the piece. But we didn't cast them in roles or anything. We started doing an anti-theater workshop.
Yes, we started holding anti-auditions, in fact, because we needed the right kind of actors to work on this piece long term, So we were already in
a big process.
Yeah.
I don't know what we were going to do with the play. We don't have the rights. It was denied by Elizabeth
Martin, the representative here in New York. So, as we were working on it, we knew it would become a long-term process. I contacted the estate in Frankfurt, and I had done my own translation, and I called it Trash, the City and Death, which I felt to be a better translation. Performing Arts Journal published a translation that they called Garbage, the City and Death, and that's how it was known in the United States.
It was known only because of that journal. There are other journals that used to translate it as trash.
As trash as well, but the guy they published translated it as Garbage, the City and Death. So I flew there, and they said no as well at first, but I convinced them that we weren't doing it because we wanted to use the scandal and do it strictly for those purposes.
Although we were, in a certain sense. We wanted to bring the topic out in the open, which is the real estate speculation destroying a city.
Okay, but that's different than some random theater
No, it was specific.
Exploiting a scandal to try to make a name for themselves. I told them, look, we come at this from a very specific place and from a very extensive history at this point of Genet. Fassbinder did exactly the same kind of work that we were doing. He made a film out of one of Genet's novels. So they kept saying, no, we want a big theater, a theater like the Public in New York to do the play. And I said, you guys, the Public is never, ever going to do this play. Not any theater that has a board of directors and is as big as the Public is going to touch this play with a 10-foot pole. Eventually, they agreed, and they said yes. They asked that we move the play to a larger theater than ABC No Rio, which we did. We ended up at Theater on Bond, I think it was called.
It wasn't that much bigger.
No, that was the whole thing. It was within our budget, but it actually didn't hold all that many more people than
quite a bit more. Right?
It did, yeah, it did.
But we're talking about 99-seat theater.
Right,
basically.
Exactly. It was then that we contacted Bonnie Maranka.
It wasn't then. We contacted him before we got the rights.
Okay, all right. Yeah, please. We had contacted her. That's when we found out. Go ahead. You tell that part.
Well, we found out. We found out from what? You found out from the estate?
Yeah.
Is that the way you found out?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We had contacted Bonnie Maranka saying, work with us. We contacted all kinds of people. Jim Leverett. We contacted...
Well, they were all the people that were in the journal, Performing Arts
Exactly.
Journal, that wrote about the play. And we contacted them, asking them to come in and help dramaturg our work on it.
Yeah, and to work with us on it, right?
Sending them an outline of how we were working with anti-theater and,
extensive outline on our dramaturgy, how we were following the way Fassbinder worked on his pieces.
His theater pieces.
His theater pieces, yeah.
Right.
Well,
his film somewhat too, right.
Very professional actors working with us, but we were auditioning to find very specific actors who wanted to work with us in this particular kind of method.
Over a long
process, like 7 months, I think,
right.
in the end is what it was. Because it needed to be examined fully, extensively, and deeply, right? And we never heard from either one of them. And then I found out that she went behind our back, and we hold a grudge to this day on both of them, that it went behind our back and went not to us, but to the estate. We had formed our ensemble.
Went to the estate with what? I mean...
Saying they're working on this piece.
Yeah, well, right. You mean before you went over there and asked to do it? Oh, right. Yeah, because we were asking him to come work on it.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing quote unquote illegal about working on a
No,
No,
we first of all, anytime you want, you can present a workshop production of something without charging admission.
Yeah.
But the thing is, instead of coming to us and working with us, she went behind our back and tattletaled about us to the estate, Yeah. Any case, we started working with this ensemble, a third of which was Jewish, tackling these tough issues. And we contacted a lot of individuals.
By the way, can I say something here just about Bonnie and Jim Leverett and basically all critics at that time? I mean, they thought they owned the play. The play was supposedly unproducible.
Yeah.
So they owned the play. So they wanted to continue to own the play. They didn't want to see the public see it. They wanted to control how the public related to
Yes,
this
and we'll
play.
get to that when the play actually opened.
Okay.
Right? We also contacted, for example, Jeremy Gerard, who at the time wrote for the New York Times.
Now, this is after we get in the rights now.
Yeah, we've got the rights now.
Yeah,
Let's
so
just
we're
say we've
putting
got
out
the
a
rights.
press release.
Yes.
And people are contacting us from the press release.
Yes, yeah.
We're not contacting individual critics.
That's true. That's true. We didn't contact Jeremy Gerard. He contacted us.
That's what was so amazing to me. You sent out a press release and then the Times contacts you.
Right. So, well, why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they? Well, for one reason, we're a small theater.
Unknown theater. Yeah.
Unknown theater. But obviously, some theater critics know what's going on in theater journals.
Right, exactly.
And knowing that this play is significant.
Exactly,
right?
and he did, and he kept in touch with us. I would say at least weekly, maybe more often. How's it going? How's it going?
What's going on?
Well,
Yeah.
Jeremy, we're getting death threats from the JDL, the Jewish Defense League.
Well, yeah, that was left. That was left on the phone
Answering
machine.
machine.
Answering machine.
Yeah.
And the JDL were a dangerous group back then. They had been arrested and suspected of a lot of violence in their Jewish defense.
Yeah. A lot of things happened. This is also a very long story. Yes, we contacted Leverett, who now is, I think, professor of dramaturgy at Yale or something. And he didn't work with us either. He, after the play opened, wrote a scathing piece about us using all of the dramaturgy that we had written and given him. He practically took our letter and turned it upside down and wrote an article in a secondary paper in Frankfurt, an article he never could have published here in New York, by the way.
What do you mean he couldn't have published? He can publish anything he wants anywhere he wants.
Right.
I mean, but he's decided not to do it.
Not to do it.
In the mix of all the press that was happening in New York.
Exactly.
By the way, the Times did not put out an article.
In the end, after following this thing the entire way, the Times did not write anything about it once it opened. All right. We also had, this was funny and goes towards the difference between Frankfurt and New York. Okay, this is an amazing story of why the environment is much different. There was a nightclub back then called The Tunnel. And it was gonna
a very happening place. I mean,
yes,
this
a major
was a night
nightclub.
stop. Yeah.
It was on the west side in a tunnel. Railroad tunnel. And it was going to donate, I think, one evening's proceeds or something like that to the production.
Yeah, they were going to put on a benefit for it.
A benefit, that's what it was. Yeah, a benefit. The guy who ran the tunnel, the manager, his name, he went by Rudolph, just Rudolph. And he was the son of a Nazi war criminal who grew up in Argentina, which is where a lot of the Nazis went after the war.
He grew up in Argentina.
Yeah. But the owner of the tunnel, one of the co-owners of the tunnel, was Eli Dayan, son of Moshe Dayan, who was a military leader and a politician in Israel. So, it was a much different environment
in New York,
a city like New York.
Then Germany. Yeah, Germany has to deal with its past differently than...
Much differently, exactly. Yeah. And I worked, as I told you earlier, at Rothschild at the time. And I this big Jewish banking family. I was thinking, oh my God, what if somebody finds out? So I decided to tell Robert de Rothschild that I was doing this. He didn't say anything. I'm not sure he knew anything about it.
Robert was the one that was really into theater.
Yeah, he was the artist. I never heard back. I never heard any more about it. They probably decided it's best to just ignore it versus to try to make something out of it. But in any case, it was kind of off my shoulders then. I wasn't keeping secrets from anybody, So after a 7-month rehearsal process, Thieves Theatre presented the world premiere of Fassbinder's Trash, the City, and Death.
Yeah, and by the way, the cast was probably 1/3 Jewish.
I said that.
Yeah, it's probably the same demographic that's in the city itself.
That was very important to us. As far as going in depth on this piece and getting all input from all voices, as we worked on this. So on opening night, it was a free-for-all. We had press from all over Europe, from Denmark to Italy. And we told them, you guys, this is no longer your piece. You cannot each individually set up cameras.
Yeah, they wanted to set up cameras.
They wanted to set up camera. And in that tiny space, there would have been no room for audience members. We said, we'll videotape it and we'll give you footage. Right? And they were outraged because they were so used to this production, this play belonging to them and not to a live, actual theater-going audience. Right? And the press coverage was very divided.
The European press coverage.
No, well, yeah, the European press coverage, right, exactly.
Some of them said that there wasn't even any press coverage in the United States.
Which was a lie. There was all kinds of press
coverage. There wasn't
coverage.
the New York Times, but there was all the alternative newspapers.
The Advocate, The Nation.
The Voice.
The Voice, Paper.
Okay.
On and on. There was plenty of press coverage. But like in Germany, it kind of divided into the snooty, not so snooty, like the Frankfurter Allgemeine, the main German Frankfurt paper, was scathing. And of course, Jim Leverett in the secondary paper in Frankfurt. But there were major German magazines like Der Spiegel and Stern who were very positive, and they really covered it favorably and in depth.
Yeah, they were
and they
there.
Understood what it was that we were trying to do.
Well, that's because they were there in the process.
They were there.
Yeah.
As part of the process, exactly. Some of them said Fassbinder would have been proud. It was a posthumous gift to Fassbinder. And others, the snooty ones, were saying it was amateur, not knowing anything about how Fassbinder went about deliberately doing theater, So that's pretty much the story of Trash the City and Death.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And after that production, I went to Germany for a year because I wanted to act in German in my native language. And I had pretty much the same experience in theater there as I did in theater here, broadly speaking. It was pretty much divided into, in exclusivity in elitism on the one hand, and we may or may not let you into our elite club on the one hand, or inclusivity and sharing resources on the other. And that was going to be a big theme for us, and is to this day in the theater going forward, especially when we did something called RAT Conference, which you can find on our website, which was a 10-year theater movement that we co-founded. It was all about inclusivity, Eric started that. So I went to Germany. Okay, lost my train of thought for a second. I went to Germany, and the first people I contacted were, of course, the Schauspielhaus in Frankfurt. They sent us flowers, congratulating us for actually
a telegram opening
and
night.
a telegram, opening. Oh yeah, telegram, not flowers. Yeah, a telegram. Sorry,
not flowers.
That would be too weird. They sent us a telegram on opening night congratulating us. But when I went there, they played, we may or may not let you in, even though I just accomplished something that they didn't, and that I came from arguably the best theater school in this country, which, I had credentials. In other words, all right, fine. I moved on, and I ended up acting for 7 months in a play at Theaterhaus in Stuttgart, which is, to this day, a wonderful venue. And when I got back, we did a couple more smaller productions, including Genet's The Maids.
Yeah, we did The Maids in people's apartments.
In people's apartments.
In other words, go to someone's apartment put up signs for maids.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, it was alternative. It was a different kind of production of The Maids.
Right, it was also site-specific.
And the person whose apartment was...
But while we were cooking up our next major feat, we did that. What?
Right.
Go ahead. The person who was what?
Well, I was just going to tell some more about The Maids.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you felt it was worth telling. Go ahead.
You don't think it was?
Yeah, sure, I do.
I think it was great. I mean, essentially, you'd have the person who hired us be the madam. And
yes.
And the only two actors in the play were the two maids.
But this is contingent on explaining what The Maids is about to those people who aren't theater people and don't know The Maids, which is why I didn't know if you wanted to get into that can of words. It was two maids and their madam that they were, talking about behind her back, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. That's enough said about The Maids, no? You want to say more?
No,
okay.
That's fine.
So, the question I get asked sometimes is, why would a Yale graduate park herself in the shantytown? And I've answered that partially in the last few episodes, but, a big influence on us at the time was Genet's posthumously published book, Prisoner of Love, when that came out. And it was about the time that he spent with the Black Panthers and mostly the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and talking about that book, he once said, obviously, I am drawn to people in revolt because I myself have the need to call the whole of society into question. And I think Nick had been there already, but I was slowly getting there myself. After one experience after another that just made me shake my head all the time and felt inauthentic, that word that is used so much this day and age, which I don't really like because nobody can really explain to me what authenticity means, but okay, it gets the job done. And Edmund White, in his foreword to the book, said, Prisoner of Love reconciles Genet's feelings that everyone is of equal value and that each of us is priceless. So in the next episode, we're going to dive headlong into The Hill story.
Right.
Thank you for listening to The Hill by Thieves Theatre. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you know when our next episode is out.
Check out our website at thievestheatre.org and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at TP on the Hill. That's TIPI on the Hill.
Thanks again for listening.
Thank you.
Until next time.